Hey, before you watch this video, I highly recommend that you go back and watch the part 1 of this. Also, if you somehow haven't, the original take on this, which is what I'm continuing off of. Don't know how you got in here if you haven't done that, but you should really go watch those first before you watch this. You are going to be very confused if you have not seen those. And with that being said, right now I still have them ordered from villains to heroes, because even though we are merged, they're still in the losers and winners cabin based off the last challenge that they had. The villains lost and the heroes won, and Mal, Brick, and Gwen are in the spa hotel. Courtney's actually on Boney Island, so she's not there with them. The interactions everybody's having are still team-based, because the merge hasn't officially happened yet. Dakota would confront Alejandro about using her idol last night, expectedly angry. But Alejandro is able to defend himself pretty well, saying that he's sorry for lying, but he had no other choice, otherwise he would have been eliminated, and asks Dakota if that's what she would have preferred. Dakota gets what he's saying and feels kinda bad for scolding him, since he had no choice but to use her statue to save himself. However, she's still a bit upset and a little on edge about him in general. Whereas before they were really close-knit, she's now still a little upset at him. Everybody would go outside and Chris would officially announce the merge to everybody. Zoe pulls Mike in for a hug, saying it's nice to be reunited, and Mal agrees while smiling sinisterly behind her back. The challenge would start, and as everybody is running to the boats, Duncan originally tries to partner up with Gwen and Courtney, and in the original they say no. And I still think it's a no here, even though him and Gwen are on good terms because they're still dating, and Courtney did agree to not eliminate him last night. Courtney and Duncan still are very far away from good terms like them. The only thing that's holding them together is Gwen. And considering that Courtney just got Gwen back as a friend, I think she kinda wanted as like a girls thing just to have Duncan away from her for now. So she'd be adamant about Duncan not coming. And because Gwen has spent all season trying to make amends with Courtney, and it's the whole reason she even came back to All-Stars, she wouldn't argue with Courtney on this, and tells Duncan no while apologizing for saying he can't come. Alejandro would still get to the boats first, and get his original boat, with Gwen and Courtney coming up shortly behind him getting their original boat. Mal would come up after this, and destroy some of the boats like he originally does, but now since Brick is here, I imagine him being a pretty good runner, and I could definitely see him making it to the boats around this time. Obviously he doesn't tell Mike off for doing this since he knows about Mal, but seeing that the boats just got broken by Mal, insists that he comes with Mal. And Mal doesn't really mind this since he knows if they were to cross the finish line, he can force Brick to give him the win. So Brick could help Mal while he's on the boat, sabotaging other people or just not having to drive. And also by forcing Brick to come with him, he makes sure that he can't be with somebody else to like influence him on Mal. Like if he was with Zoe, maybe they could talk about Mike and then maybe he'd blow Mal's cover. So they would go together in Mal's original boat. This leaves Zoe, Dakota, and Duncan on the raft as it's the only boat left that floats. And because both Cameron and Scott aren't here, they would be stuck with no motor, meaning no chance of winning the challenge. Gwen and Courtney originally get their boat motor blown up by Chef, which makes them lose a lot of time and eventually have to paddle. During this time, they also get passed by Mike and Brick, and even the raft catches up with them. Since they have to completely stop to fix the motor and the raft is still paddling, the raft catches up to them. Courtney would see Dakota struggling on the raft and wanting to help her out would offer her a ride on the boat, and Dakota would accept this offer, jumping onto Gwen and Courtney's boat. This annoys Gwen as she buckled to Courtney's wish for this to be just their day and kicked Duncan out, but then accepted someone else anyways. Gwen confronts Courtney about this, and Courtney gets defensive, saying that Dakota is a friend of hers and Duncan isn't. Gwen, realizing the dichotomy of Courtney's statement, asks if Zoe can join them then, and Courtney, not wanting to contradict herself since she agreed that Dakota can come because they were friends, and Gwen and Zoe are friends, she agrees, letting Zoe also come onto their boat. As Zoe jumps onto their boat, their engine gets fixed, and Gwen is about to speak up again, telling Courtney to also let Duncan on, but Courtney is visibly getting annoyed, and Gwen doesn't want to push her luck as she just got her friendship back with Courtney, so again, she apologizes to Duncan while the boat drives away, waving back to him. Duncan is upset at these turn of events since he trusted Gwen, and the raft already had no chance of winning, but now with just him paddling, he's accepted defeat and just decides to lay on the raft while contemplating what happened. Originally in the episode, Chef dropped sticks of dynamite, one on Courtney and Gwen's boat, and one on the raft. He already dropped one on Courtney and Gwen's boat, but now that the raft isn't doing well and isn't a threat in this challenge, it just has Duncan, so it would be kind of boring to see it blow up. And also the raft probably isn't even far enough along, like in the course to the dynamite section where Chef does it, and it means Chef would have another stick of dynamite to drop on a boat, meaning either Mike's boat or Alejandro's boat. And seeing as Mal and Brick get in the lead for most of the challenge, because Alejandro's boat engine stalls for a bit in the challenge, Chef would drop a stick of dynamite on Mal's boat. And because Mal has Brick with him, Brick would notice the dynamite and freak out running around with it. Mal gets annoyed with Brick's panicking, but seeing this fear gives him an idea for the dynamite, so Mal quickly stops driving and takes the dynamite from Brick's hand and throws it at Alejandro's boat, which is shortly behind them. Alejandro wouldn't have enough time to stop the dynamite from blowing up, as the fuse on the dynamite is already near its end. Mal would quickly get get back to driving, and after the explosion clears, Alejandro looks over to see who threw the dynamite at him, and sees Brick on the outside of the boat, so Alejandro assumes that Brick did it. Duncan would be lying on his back on the raft, and there would be a scene of him talking to himself about everything that happened. Starting spiteful and accusatory of people, but quickly forgives Gwen as he understands her situation, and while he's looking at it from other people's perspectives, he also sees it from Courtney's side, and starts to realize how much he must have hurt her in World Tour to be so mad at him and so distrustful of people, and really starts to regret what he did. Now, because every other boat present in this challenge has had at least one point where they had to stop for something, Duncan's raft obviously just doesn't work, Courtney and Gwen's boat, their motor got blown up, Alejandro's motor stalled, and then he also got dynamite thrown at him, and Mal's boat is the only one that has never been stalled, I feel pretty confident in saying that Mal and Brick would cross the finish line first. At the end of the challenge, Chris would remind Mike and Brick that the challenge was for individual immunity, so they have to decide between themselves who gets the win. As Chris is saying this, Alejandro confronts Brick for throwing dynamite at him, even grabbing him by the shirt. Mal, seeing the opportunity to throw Brick under the bus, acts shocked, asking how Brick could do that. Brick is about to defend himself, but Mal talks over Brick, saying that he should make up for it by letting Mike take the win so he doesn't get rewarded for sabotaging. There is a little pause, but Brick's still too afraid to speak out against Mal, takes the fall, and hands Mal invincibility. Now, luckily for Brick, this framing of sabotage wouldn't really affect his social standing with anyone except Alejandro. Duncan, Gwen, and Courtney wouldn't be mad at him for sabotaging Alejandro, a not-so-great guy who's extremely strong in challenges, and given the same opportunity, I could see any of these three doing the same. Zoe and Dakota would be confused since they competed with Brick last season for a large portion of the game, and they know that sabotaging is not something that Brick would do, and would be confused to why he did it, but it wouldn't negatively infect anything. At most, they'd just be kind of confused how it could happen, and probably more doubtful that it even happened at all. Probably being more willing to blame Alejandro for just freaking out about nothing, and maybe Brick wasn't even involved. In the original, Chris gave Alejandro the opportunity to take someone to the spa hotel for winning, so Chris would give the same opportunity to Mal, and Mal would take Alejandro. I won't say the reason since it's a bit of a spoiler, but I will explain it later. After the challenge, Duncan would find time to pull Courtney aside and apologize for what happened in World Tour, and says that they don't have to be best of friends or anything, but they should find a way to tolerate being around each other because making Gwen choose between them isn't fair to her. Courtney gets extremely angry at this, and she feels sickened by the fact that Duncan thinks he's a good influence for Gwen, and that he even deserves to have Gwen after what he did in his relationship with her. Also telling him that she moved on a while ago and doesn't need his words anymore. This fight becomes a loud spectacle, and everyone in both cabins walk out to watch what happens. The fight eventually ends with Courtney storming off as Gwen watches on sad. The vote is a little all over the place. Since the merge just happened, it's kind of hard to tell who gets targeted the most. Now, Courtney is most likely voting Duncan because of what just happened, and Alejandro is probably voting Brick because he's still mad at him for sabotaging. But now that Alejandro doesn't have invincibility and he is a big threat in this game, I think just about everybody else would vote for him. However, he isn't gone quite yet. In the original of this episode, Mal rigged the votes in this round against Cameron. Now, it didn't matter since Duncan was eliminated for blowing up the mansion, saving Cameron from being eliminated, but now that Duncan didn't do this, he wouldn't be removed, meaning the vote would decide who goes home, and because Mal rigged this vote, Mal has 100% say on who gets eliminated tonight. So with that knowledge, I can easily remove some options. Obviously, he wouldn't rig the votes on himself, or Brick because he has Brick under his finger. I also think Alejandro is safe, as in the original, we saw that Mal in the next episode framed Alejandro for rigging the votes in this round, and I'm assuming Mal would still think to do that, since Alejandro is a villainous figure, so it makes sense for him to frame Alejandro for rigging the votes since he seems like a character who would do that. Plus, as I just mentioned earlier, everybody else was voting for Alejandro, so he was going to be eliminated this round, so this backs it up even more for Alejandro to do this. As for everyone else, I do think there is some chance for them to be eliminated. I still decided that Zoe would be safe, since Mal seemed to have the impression that Zoe was under his finger in the original, and also Mal was kind of up his own ass in the original and thought he was doing really well acting like Mike, and doesn't even have thoughts that anybody's gonna catch on to him pretending to be Mal until this episode. He goes a while thinking that he's doing a good job at this. So I don't even think he would think that Zoe is going to catch on to him. Dakota is kind of a tough one to read Mal's opinion on. She isn't a typical threat, but socially she is a big threat in the game. But I don't think Mal would really know that. If you look at the times that Mal's been in control, there wasn't really a time where he would have seen Dakota interacting with a lot of people. He never saw Dakota interact with Brick or Courtney or even Alejandro, all of which are our strongest connections. So taking the possibility of Mal to see her as a social threat away, I don't think Mal would necessarily want her gone at all. And this leaves Duncan, Gwen, and Courtney. Both Duncan and Courtney don't have as many allies as Gwen, and an important thing to know is that Gwen is the glue that holds them together, since they both want to be around Gwen, but it's obvious that Duncan and Courtney don't get along. And with Gwen gone, they wouldn't work together, meaning Mal would effectively destroy this sort of alliance of three, in a sense, by getting rid of Gwen. So Mal would. Everybody would be confused since Chris says it's a unanimous vote, but people like Duncan and Courtney know they didn't vote for her. Gwen isn't too upset about leaving since she came back to fix things with Courtney, and she's done that, so she would just like to leave the show. Also, she's happy that she's able to leave before she had to make a decision between Courtney and Duncan, since that threat was kind of arising. Duncan and Gwen have an emotional scene before her elimination, where Gwen apologizes for leaving him today, and Duncan understands, saying that Courtney seemed really determined to make sure he didn't come. Gwen pauses for a bit and asks Duncan for a favor, and Duncan agrees, saying he'd do anything for her. Gwen tells him that she wants him to smooth things over with Courtney, since Gwen wants to keep being friends with her, but that becomes harder when there is so much animosity still between them. Also because Gwen saw firsthand today how much the situation in World Tour is still affecting Courtney, and thinks it could help Courtney to get proper closure on the issue. Duncan is unsure since he tried today and got scolded, but promises Gwen that he'll try his best, wanting to do this for Gwen. The episode ends with Mal whistling to himself as it plays back him rigging the votes against Gwen. Alejandro and Mike would be together in the Spa Hotel, and seeing as Mal made a fake alliance with Alejandro in the original, this would be even a better time to mention it to Alejandro. And Alejandro agrees since he likes the discreet approach, just like he did in the original. Courtney has a confessionals, displaying her anger/sadness that Gwen is gone, but the confessional is interrupted by a knock on the door. She opens it up to see Duncan, and then slams the door. Duncan knocks again, annoyed, saying that he gets that she isn't very happy with him right now, but there's something off with Gwen's elimination last night, since Chris said it was a unanimous vote, but Duncan knows that he didn't vote for Gwen, and he's pretty sure Courtney didn't either. Courtney now slowly opens the door, asking what Duncan is trying to imply. And Duncan says that could only mean that someone tampered with the votes, and is about to refer to Harold doing it to Courtney in season 1, but stops himself as Courtney glares at him before he could say it, since she knew where he was going with it. Mal's shadow outline behind the confessional booth is seen by both Duncan and Courtney, causing them to yell, before Mike steps out, become visible, apologizing for scaring them, but tells them he was listening to them because he was thinking the exact same thing about Gwen. It suggests that they look in the cabins together to get clues. Courtney reluctantly agrees, since even though she hates Duncan, she would want to know if Gwen got unfairly eliminated. So they look through the Mal cabin together, with Mal lifting Alejandro's pillow and finding a stack of votes for Gwen. You might be wondering why Alejandro didn't switch the votes with Mike's pillow like he does in the original, and the reason is that because in the original episode, Alejandro was sitting in a hot tub enjoying the spa hotel by himself, but Chris joined him in the hot tub nude, which grossed Alejandro out, prompting Alejandro to leave the hot tub and find the surveillance room, and catch Mal faming Alejandro. But now that Chris still has his mansion, since Duncan never blew it up, Chris would never join Alejandro since he'd just be in his own mansion, meaning Alejandro would have just stayed in the hot tub. Courtney is fuming, crumbling the votes in her hand with her tight grip, as she explains that she never would have thought Alejandro would stoop this low, but now he's done for. Duncan is shocked and does think that it's possible that Alejandro did it, but Duncan doesn't trust Mike since he still somewhat recognizes Mal from juvie. He still hasn't connected the dots since they haven't been around each other that much, but he does know that Mike is untrustworthy, so he takes this information with a grain of salt. The challenge would start and people would break off into groups, and a lot changes here. Mainly because Scott and Courtney aren't here to go off together as their couple. First off, Mike and Zoe would still go together since they are a definite pair, and because Mal is blackmailing Brick, Brick would join them. Now I think Dakota actually leans going with Alejandro over that group, because she's been getting really strange vibes from Brick and Mike recently, so she feels like Alejandro is the only one she can trust since they still have a fairly good bond. You know, even though the whole idol statue thing happens, Dakota really does think of him as an older brother and does think they have a strong connection, and would also want to get past that. Duncan and Courtney are kinda toss-ups, but I decided that Duncan would probably go with the Mike, Zoe, and Brick group, since Duncan doesn't trust Mike, so he wants to be around him to see what he's up to, try and catch anything suspicious. And I think Courtney goes alone since she's really upset about Gwen being gone and just wants to be alone right now. But it's important to note here that Alejandro and Dakota would still go the way that Alejandro originally does, and Courtney would still go the same way that her and Scott went in the original, since there's no reason for those to change. Courtney's path was her idea, Alejandro's path was his idea, they still go those ways. Brick would be pacing back and forth outside the entrance to the cave, afraid of going back into the dark cave since he's afraid of the dark. And just like when Gwen was pacing back and forth originally because she was afraid of going to a claustrophobic cave, the floor would fall under Brick, sending him into the caves, and Zoe would jump down after him to help. Unlike the original where Mal pulled Cameron down a different hole, I think Mal would actually want to follow Zoe and Brick since they are his closer allies. But since Duncan is trying to get a read on Mike, Duncan himself would pull Mike down a separate hole so that he and Mike are alone and he can confront him, meaning that Duncan and Mal get separated from Brick and Zoe. Similar to what happens to Zoe and Gwen, Brick would freak out about being in the dark cave, and Zoe would help calm him down. Now that Dakota is traveling with Alejandro, when he gets his boot stuck between the rocks, Dakota would be able to help him dislodge the boot, so Alejandro can keep his boot. This gesture makes Alejandro actually start to like Dakota as a person, Not like best friends like how Dakota thinks they are, but Alejandro says in confessional that he likes her company. You know, instead of like strategy where he originally befriended her when she got moved on to the team, he kind of just did that out of like, I need a number, but now he's like actually starting to like Dakota as a person. Like Gwen and Zoe, Brick would be acting paranoid, and while he's distracted looking around, Zeke captures Zoe having the opportunity. Mike is trying to work with Duncan, continuing insisting that he's innocent and Alejandro is guilty, but Duncan dismisses all of what he says, and eventually Duncan grabs Mal by the shirt with a fist raised, asking Mike where he knows him from and to tells him to spit it out. But Duncan does this in the spot where originally Courtney and Scott fell on top of Mike and Cameron, meaning that once Duncan does this, Courtney crashes into them falling from above. Mal realizes that he has too much heat on himself, and he needs to get Duncan's attention off of himself, and seeing the opportunity of everybody being dazed, Mal kicks Duncan into Courtney, causing them to kiss. This would make Courtney irate, thinking that Duncan kissed her on purpose. Duncan tries to defend himself, saying it was an accident, and as they are arguing, Zeke kidnaps both of them. Now that it's just Mal that's involved with the mini cave-in that caused the floor under Cameron to fall originally, Mal would be the one that has the floor break under his feet as he grabs onto the view at the last second. Dakota and Alejandro would walk up to see Mike hanging onto the side of the wall, and Alejandro helps Mike up since they're in an unspoken alliance. But during this time in the original, Ezekiel originally captures Alejandro. Now I don't really think Alejandro would try to capture all three of them at once, since that seems a bit of a stretch. Also, Ezekiel just can't physically carry 3 people at once, like back to the cage, so this means that Ezekiel would only be able to capture one of them. I think that Alejandro would have to help Mal up since he has longer arms to reach Mike and is also just stronger than Dakota. Dakota would get kidnapped by Ezekiel while Alejandro pulls Mal up. Now Mal is a bastard. And considering he just planned the seeds for Alejandro being the one who rigged the votes, he would want Alejandro gone as soon as possible, i.e. not winning this challenge. So once Mal gets helped up, he pretends to be thankful for a bit before pushing Alejandro down the hole himself. Alejandro would fall down the hole into the river that Cameron originally falls into. And Brick taking the same path that Gwen did originally, he'd be walking nearby and see Alejandro fall into the river. So Brick, being a no man left behind sort of guy, even though he doesn't really like Alejandro and they have some tension, he would jump in to save Alejandro. Once Alejandro recovers, he's thankful for Brick saving his life and even forgives him for what he did yesterday by throwing the dynamite at him, but then he starts to recall what happens and tells Brick that Mike was the one who pushed him down the hole. Brick buckles under the guilt of helping Mal and tells Alejandro everything about Mal. Alejandro processes it all and quickly gets back on his feet, telling Brick to follow behind him, saying that they need to win the challenge before Mal does. And Brick follows behind Alejandro, excited to finally get rid of Mal. Now as for Mal, I'm pretty unsure of what he could do. I don't have like a layout of the mines or anything, but assuming that Cameron fell down a hole to a lower part of the mine to find Zeke, that means that Mal would be up at a higher part of the mine, pretty far away from Zeke's main cave. But it's important to remember here that Mal can still access Mike's personalities to help himself like he does in the obstacle course originally with Svetlana. So being lost and in a cave, Mal would access Manitoba to help himself explore the mines and get to Zeke. Brick would be hiding behind Zeke's throne and asks Alejandro what the plan is, but no response is heard. Brick turns back the way he came and sees Alejandro fighting on the ground with Mal. Brick considers helping Alejandro for a few seconds, but both of them in unison tell Brick to win the challenge, since they both don't want each other to get immunity. Chef passes everyone and saves Chris, but gets shot by Ezekiel using a pasta launcher. Brick witnesses this happen and knows if he can get to the pasta launcher, then he can shoot Zeke. So in a slight callback to last season, Brick would take off one of his boots and throws it to the other side of the room. Zeke hears the thud and then goes to explore it, and once he gets near it, he can smell Brick's stench on it and senses he must be close. But it's too late as Brick has already made his way to the pasta launcher and shoots Zeke, winning himself immunity. Once everyone escapes the cave, Alejandro and Brick would confront Mike in front of everybody. For a bit, Mal tries to continue as Mike, stumbling over his words a lot with all the pressure, but with the overwhelming evidence that Alejandro and Brick have, and also once they mention the name Mal, Duncan would join in on this, recalling Mal from his time in juvie. This would be too big of a hole for Mal to climb himself out of, and he would reveal himself to everybody, shocking the group. Now, onto the vote. Obviously, with Mal just revealing himself to everybody, you would think that he'd get eliminated here, but looking at the votes, I think there is merit for Mal actually being able to save himself here. And the first part of this is Zoe. In the original, Zoe acted very stupid with Mal. Not only was Zoe made aware of Mal's existence in the pre-merge by Duncan and chose to ignore that, but even at the final 4, when she knew with 100% certainty that Mal was in control, she still took him to the finale because she thought Mike was still in there. So considering in the original Zoe had hundreds of things slapping her in the face that Mal was in control and Mal was bad, and she still saved him, it makes me fairly confident to say that she would still save him here as well, thinking Mike is still in there. Now this isn't a canon concept, but since either way Zoe is going to help Mal, I decided to make it more interesting / rational for Zoe to help here, by having Mal approach Zoe after he reveals himself. Zoe is confused and disheartened by Mal's behavior and tells him he's sick for taking over Mike and Mal's done for. But Mal reminds her that he's also Mike, and if she gets rid of him, she's getting rid of Mike. Zoe looks away upset about this, and Mal puts a hand on her shoulder. Mal tells her that he's taken over and Mike isn't going to be in control unless she can help Mal out. Mal says that if Zoe can help Mal get to the finale, then Mal promises to let Mike free after the show. Zoe asks Mal how she can trust him, and Mal says she can't, but she also doesn't have a choice if she ever wants to see Mike again. And this would send Zoe on her job to save Mal. First off, I had to consider who Mal and Zoe would target, and very clearly, it's Alejandro. He's the biggest threat in the game and remains to be Mal's toughest rival. So knowing this, Zoe would go talk to Dakota to attempt to convince her against Alejandro. You might be wondering why Zoe would choose Dakota, since Dakota and Alejandro are pretty close, but if you can recall in the boxing episode, the villains originally lost the challenge, and Alejandro wanted to vote Dakota out and even told Zoe in on this plan to get her against Dakota. And Zoe would remember this and mention it to Dakota, saying she should vote Alejandro out tonight. Dakota would be shocked but doubtful of what Zoe's saying, but Zoe keeps prying at Dakota to be honest with herself and if she really thinks Alejandro is her friend. Dakota thinks a bit harder and remembers moments where Alejandro was constantly telling her what to do, and even recalls Alejandro insisting on Dakota to hand over her statue the morning before the boxing challenge, clearly trying to get the statue out of her possession. And that lines up perfectly with what Zoe is saying, that Alejandro wanted to vote her out to keep the statue himself. Dakota is heartbroken by the realization that Zoe's right, and Zoe comforts her, saying she's sorry Dakota had to find out this way, but now she has a chance to show Alejandro she was all wrong, thinking she could be pushed around. And looking at the current vote distribution, we have Mal, Zoe, Dakota, and then Alejandro, Brick, and Duncan, leaving Courtney in the middle. Duncan would talk to Courtney, trying to get her to see how evil Mal is and how badly he has to go, but Courtney would still be too mad at Duncan for kissing her earlier to really listen to what he's saying, and I think Courtney is already leaning to voting Alejandro because of Mal's framing Alejandro for rigging the votes against Gwen at the beginning of this episode. Duncan would try to tell Courtney that Mal is the one who brought them there, and he's probably the one who framed Alejandro since Duncan knows how bad Mal is, so it's a reasonable thing to try and connect those dots. Courtney again doesn't believe Duncan since she doesn't fully have a grasp on how evil Mal is, but she does have a grasp on how evil Alejandro is since she got manipulated by him in World Tour, so she thinks Alejandro is much more villainous and much more likely to rig the votes, and in general just a much bigger threat, because to be fair, Alejandro is probably the biggest threat this game has ever seen, so it makes sense why she'd want Alejandro gone more than Mal, since she hasn't really got a chance to see how bad he is. And now that Dakota is also voting for Alejandro, she would talk to Courtney after Duncan has her talk with Courtney, getting her to vote for Alejandro, and because Courtney trusts Dakota a lot more and was already leading this way, she would agree. So the vote would play out as a 3-4 vote, with Alejandro getting voted out. Brick, Duncan, and Alejandro would all be shocked, but eventually Alejandro would accept defeat while glaring at Mal and telling Mal that he's a slippery eel as a callback to what Noah called him in World Tour, which is kind of implying that the title of greatest manipulator and title of biggest villain that Alejandro had is being passed down to Mal. It was also part of the stipulation for winning this challenge that the winner gets permanent residence at the spa hotel as long as they're in the game, so Brick has that, and he also gets to send someone to Boney Island. And Brick would clearly choose Mal as a semblance of payback, showing Mal indefinitely that he is not working for him anymore. Brick would be in the spa hotel but wouldn't be distracted by any of the luxuries that the spa hotel has to offer and is completely focused on training for the challenge, determined to not let Mal win today. Dakota is in the female side of the cabin with Zoe and Courtney, looking distraught, feeling like saving Mal was the wrong decision, and even asked the girls if they feel like they did the right thing. Both the girls are fairly dismissive, as Courtney is still convinced that Alejandro rigged the votes against Gwen, and Zoe obviously wants to believe that Mike is still in there and is good, and also has a confessional questioning how bad Mal can really be, ironically comparing him to levels of Alejandro and Heather. Zoe says that she already had to work with people deemed villains at the beginning, so Mal can't be that bad. Once Zoe says this, it cuts to Mal on Boney Island, acting similarly to how he did originally on Boney Island, having complete control on the island and even having animals run away from him as Chef comes to take him back. Mal has a confessional saying that it's so refreshing to finally be free of acting like Mike anymore, and it feels good to be himself. When Chris explains the challenge originally, Scott calls it easy, causing Chris to make everyone wear heavy backpacks, but it's revealed later in the episode that the backpacks have the equipment needed to zipline later in the challenge, so even without Scott being here to say that line, I still think that everyone would need to wear the heavy packs. The challenge would start with Brick and Mal taking early leads as both were determined to win. Courtney would be moving through the tires with relative ease until Duncan comes up from behind to talk with Courtney, resulting in Courtney speeding up to get away from him. Duncan has a confessional saying he isn't too happy about having to try and work with Courtney, Courtney, but him and Brick are outnumbered, and Duncan needs to pull Courtney onto their side to have a chance at the vote. Also, Duncan's still trying to keep his promise to Gwen to repair things with Courtney. Duncan basically says the same cliff notes that Mal is bad and that he rigged the votes, not Alejandro. Courtney makes a full stop to stare at Duncan dead in the eyes, saying that she's tired of him, and if he wants her to believe him, then she needs him to have more proof than his word, because his word is very meaningless to her. Dakota would be struggling a lot in this challenge. Obviously she already isn't the best physically, but I think carrying a heavy backpack would be a really big struggle for her. And being the nice girl that Zoe is, I could easily imagine her staying back to help Dakota through the challenge. The first two obstacles don't have much to talk about, except that Mal would have still taken a bite from the licorice rope. Mal and Brick are still in the lead come the Snapping Turtles bar, but Brick would do a similar thing to Alejandro, jumping on Mal's leg to pull him down. Mal, like the original, would use Svetlana to spin him around, but Mike inside of Mal's brain would freeze Svetlana, making Mal return confused and still fall into the Snapping Turtles' water. Zoe and Dakota would have just about reached the top of the rope climb as this happens, and given that Dakota is a stylish person, I think she would want to take the red rope the most, and since it's the most colorful and vibrant, and once she gets near the top, it causes her to fall all the way to the top since Mal weakened the rope earlier. And I don't see Dakota as agile as Alejandro to catch herself before she falls. Zoe would contemplate going back to help Dakota, but quickly leaves her behind when she sees Mal fall in the water. Zoe would get to the other side and try to help Mal, but he just tells her to make sure that Brick doesn't win. Zoe listens to Mal and moves forward to stop Brick. Where Chef is shooting leeches at the contestants, Zoe would pull Brick out of cover and start wrestling him around, trying to let Chef shoot at Brick so he doesn't pose a threat in the challenge. As they're wrestling, Brick tries reasoning with her, asking her why she's doing this, and if this is really what Mike would want. But Brick doesn't have enough time to convince her, eventually leading to both of them getting shot with leeches. Duncan and Courtney would get to the leeches, and Duncan would still be talking to Courtney, trying to make her understand how bad Mal is. This distracts Courtney, not having her notice the leeches that Chef shoots, but Duncan notices them and pushes Courtney and himself behind cover at the last moment. Courtney gets annoyed again, asking if he's that excited to get on top of her, while walking away. Duncan gets defensive, saying that wasn't what that was, as Courtney continues on the challenge to quickly avoid him. Mal at this point would have now recovered from the turtle attack and continues in the challenge. As he passes Duncan and Courtney, he gets to Zoe where she's taking leashes off of herself and asks Mal for help. Mal coldly looks back at her and says she's here to help him, not the other way around, as he continues in the challenge. Mal makes it to the zipline section and sets up his equipment just as Brick arrives. Brick rides off and Zoe comes lightheaded from the leeches, taking a lot of blood, as Mal pulls her in, saying that the extra weight will help them pass Brick. As the both of them meet near Brick on the zipline, Mal realizes they won't be able to pass him and tells Zoe to grab on, confusing Zoe for a bit before Mal throws her at Brick. Zoe holds onto Brick's legs, making him lose speed as Brick tries to push her off, while Zoe holds on tightly, apologizing as she does. Brick just simply asks Zoe, "Who are you?" before they fall down, as Mal crosses the finish line, winning invincibility. Duncan after the challenge would have a confessional voicing his annoyance with trying to work with Courtney against Mal, since he needs her help against him. He even mentions what she said, that she would need evidence to believe him, and Duncan does a double take at the camera and knows what he needs. Duncan knows that there are cameras recording everything, and he knows from the last episode, when all the contestants met in the surveillance room at the beginning of the episode, that he can find the cameras where there could be recordings of Mal. And Duncan, being the extremely sneaky delinquent he is, I imagine could easily sneak into the spa hotel and find the disc with incriminating Mal footage. However, the main issue is that the only place that Duncan could play the disc in is in the control room. And the main people that Duncan needs to convince are Dakota and Courtney, both people who will probably not follow him to the spa hotel since they know he's breaking in. Dakota is more likely to come, but what you have to keep in mind is Dakota's been friends with Courtney for a while and heard the side of the story that Duncan is a cheater and not a good guy. So that plus Courtney showing lots of distaste for Duncan, I don't really see Dakota wanting to follow Duncan on this. This means that Duncan has evidence of Mal's heinous nature, but unfortunately no way to really show it to anyone. Duncan hears Mal's footsteps wandering the halls near the security room and still takes the DVD in case it comes in handy later. Now looking at the votes as I just said, Courtney and Dakota are both pretty anti-Duncan at this point. Meanwhile, Brick and Duncan have no real way to get either of them back on their side. Maybe, potentially, possibly, Brick could pull Dakota, but also Mal was the one who won invincibility this round, meaning Brick and Duncan are targeting Zoe, and Zoe was nice to Dakota, helping her through the challenge, so I don't think Dakota would really want to screw Zoe over like that. So I see the vote pretty easily playing out as a 4-2 vote, with Duncan getting eliminated. During Duncan's elimination, Brick would come up to Duncan, shaking his hand, saying he played well and Brick will finish what they started. Duncan would shake Brick's hand back and is seen pulling him in closer while whispering to Brick and handing him a disc. Because this is happening in front of everyone, Mal notices and gets an angry look on his face. Duncan takes his elimination, giving out to Chris one last time before being flushed. After the elimination, Brick would be looking at the disc that Duncan gave to him with a smile on his face. Mal speaks up from behind Brick, asking what's that in his hand. Brick tries to play dumb, asking what Mal means, but Mal just stares at Brick harder, asking him if he really thinks he's that dumb. Mal snaps his fingers, and from the trees above, Zoe drops down behind Brick, stealing the disc from Brick. Brick tries to reach back for the disc, but Mal grabs Brick in a chokehold from behind as Zoe reads off the label on the disc, which says Mal's greatest hits. Mal realizes the disc must be showing all of Mal's bad actions and applauds Brick for getting that before taking back the compliment, saying that he should be applauding Duncan and it makes sense because Brick was always more of a follower. Mal then tells Zoe to smash the disc while Brick helplessly flails his limbs, begging Zoe to not do it. Zoe struggles holding the disc in her hand for a bit, but wanting to make sure Mal can stay in the game, she drops it on the ground and stomps on it. Mal now lets go of Brick as Brick falls to the ground. Mal grabs Zoe by the arm as they walk back to the cabins, leaving Brick defeated. Zoe, while getting pulled by Mal, asks him if he thinks they went too far, and Mal just chuckles, saying he's unaware there's a limit. Zoe has a troubled look on her face as she starts to have her mind wander and remembers many moments that make her feel guilty. Most relating to helping Mal, but two that stand out in particular are Brick saying "Who are you?" during the challenge, and also the talk that Scott gave to her in the beach episode where he told her that he thought she was done taking orders and was finally standing up for herself. Zoe, having all these thoughts rush back to her head, then snaps, throwing her arm up, breaking Mal's grip on her arm, yelling enough as lightning strikes when she does so. Mal calmly asks Zoe if she has a problem, and Zoe freaks out on him, calling him awful and saying he's a rotten human being. Mal tells Zoe to watch it or he'll take matters into his own hands. Zoe tells Mal to fuck off, causing Mal to be a bit shocked as he didn't think she had this much edge to her, and then asks Zoe if she's with him or against him. Zoe struggles again, saying she's with him, not for him, but for Mike. But also if she's going to continue working with Mal, then things need to be a bit different. Mal asks her what needs to change while Zoe bends down to the ground for a second before standing back up with war paint on her face and a headband made from a ripped part of her shirt. It's Commando Zoe. Commando Zoe tells Mal that they work as one, and he will treat her with respect. She says this assertively while getting in Mal's face. Mal is kinda into this, really liking this more dark side to Zoe, and with a smile agrees to her terms. Commando Zoe seems pleased with her offer being taken seriously, and she pulls Mal into a dip and kisses him while lightning strikes in the background behind them. The episode will start off with Brick lacing up his pair of boots for his early morning jog, with Mal tripping him before he leaves while pretending to apologize. Brick stands up for himself, saying he won't get pushed around by him, and if he wants to try and provoke him and make him feel ashamed, it won't work. Mal laughs, saying that's nice, but it doesn't change anything, and Brick acts like he's strong and he's worthy of leadership, but when it actually matters, he cracks, saying Cameron is gone and Cameron is gone because you were a wuss when it mattered and voted out your own friend. Brick gets angry at the mention of Cameron and leaves in a huff for a jog. Brick has a confessional where he has a proud look on his face, saying Mal might be good at playing with others, but today Brick is playing with him. Well, Brick pulls out a disc from his pocket that says Mal's greatest hits. We have a flashback to last night, actually allowing what Duncan said to Brick to be heard, revealing that Duncan intentionally gave Brick a fake disc with a fake label because Duncan was sure that Mal would see their interaction and break the disc, lowering Mal's guard. While Duncan also tells Brick the location of the real disc that he hid in the spa hotel. I figured Duncan would have done this since being a criminal he knows that people are always watching him, so creating a plan to get Mal comfortable was a good way to give Brick a chance to get the disc without having to worry about Mal catching him. Brick says his morning jog will have to wait as Courtney needs to see all of Mal and understand that she's siding with the devil. Dakota and Courtney both wake up suddenly to Commando Zoe practicing loudly in the cabin. I'd say this practice is just her punching a dummy since Commando Zoe is a warrior-esque personality, so preparing for a challenge by fighting makes sense to me. Dakota asks the loud noise if it can quiet down, and Commando Zoe responds brashly by saying, yeah, you wouldn't like the sound of hard work. Dakota recognizes the tone of the voice and instantly sits up in her bed to see Commando Zoe. Commando Zoe does a spin kick, cleanly kicking the head off of the dummy, while grinning at Dakota, asking, did you miss me? Courtney now responds to all the noise, groaning and asking what's all the noise for, and then turns to see Commando Zoe. Courtney doesn't know who Commando Zoe is, but from appearance, Zoe looks a lot more intense, which intimidates Courtney. Commando Zoe gets up in Courtney's face and asks her if she's got a problem with it while cracking her knuckles. Now Courtney herself is pretty intense and aggressive, so I don't think she would take very kindly to Commando Zoe's attitude, getting closer to Commando Zoe's face saying she does have a problem while insulting Zoe for looking like a savage. They have a stare off and Dakota, seeing the tension, gets between them, telling them to calm down. Courtney says whatever while heading to the board side of the cabin since no one's there and she wants to sleep away from them right now. Courtney has a confessional saying she's honored to be the last person from the original cast, saying she always knew it was going to be her, but still. Courtney also gives praise to the others, saying she's impressed by how many of the second cast were able to keep up with the old players, but also prods at them, saying they make the first cast look normal of how crazy they all are. Courtney steps outside the cabin and Brick pulls Courtney into a nearby bush, muffling her mouth. Courtney bites his hand, making Brick let go, but before she says anything, Brick tells her to quiet down, and tells her that she has no idea who Mal is and Brick's going to show her while pulling the disc out of his pocket. Courtney is confused, but Brick tells her to follow, and Courtney's curiosity makes her follow along. Sneaking past Mal into the camera room isn't too hard for them, as Mal's guard is already low, so he's already kind of written off Brick as being able to do anything anymore. So Brick takes Courtney to the surveillance room and plays the disc showing all of Mal's terrible actions. Breaking Sierra's phone, manipulating Brick, rigging the votes against Gwen, and even shows Mal kicking Duncan into Courtney, causing their kiss in the Mines episode. The footage ends and Courtney is shocked and feels bad for not believing Duncan when he was trying to warn her. Brick asks her if she's on Brick's side now, and Courtney agrees, saying Mal is going down. Dakota and Commando Zoe being left in the cabin would result in Dakota trying to make small talk, which Zoe quickly shuts down, saying that she can feel the way Dakota is looking at her, and if she wants to say something, she should. Dakota mentions how last season Commando Zoe came out when she felt guilty about trusting Scott, resulting in her friends going, so Dakota asks Zoe if she feels guilty again. Commander Zoe says she doesn't feel guilty, she's tired, turning to Dakota saying that she understands what it's like to be used. And as Zoe, that's all that happens. She gets used and abused, and she's so tired of it. Commander Zoe even gets a bit of a light bulb in her eyes, as she asks Dakota if she's tired of it too, because she can be just like Commander Zoe. She can finally stop being voiceless and instead be heard. Dakota looks a bit uncomfortable, but also ponders the offer a bit. Dakota has a confessional saying that maybe Commander Zoe's right, but if Dakota was to go commando, then she would definitely need to take a different style, because the headband for Commando Zoe is a fashion yuck, while gesturing throwing up at the sight of it. On the way to the challenge, Mal would talk to Courtney, asking if the plan to get rid of Brick tonight is still on, and Courtney tells him that she knows exactly who Mal is, and she isn't his ally anymore, she's his enemy, and she'll make him pay for what he did to Gwen. Mal is confused, but connects the dots that Brick must have had a decor, and he showed her the evidence, since there wouldn't be any other way to convince Courtney. Mal panics for a second, but watching Commando Zoe working with Dakota, he calms down, thinking Zoe will keep Dakota on their side and keep them having the numbers of 3-2. I don't really know how to fully run the challenge, since there are a lot of factors that are difficult to consider, especially since there are new people here. I think for most of the challenge, Commando Zoe, Dakota, and Mal are in the lead. I could see Brick taking an early lead, but Mal definitely would sabotage Brick during the challenge to keep him out of the running, since Mal needs Brick to not win, since he's the target. But Courtney during the home stretch would still be able to take the shortcut to catch up. Commando Zoe, knowing that she needs Mal to have invincibility, since part of their arrangement is Commando Zoe helping Mal get to the finale, Commando Zoe would tackle Courtney to the ground, preventing her from winning as Mal crosses the finish line first, winning invincibility. In the original, Chris changes the win condition to the first to finish their ice cream, but it's clear to see that Chris does this in the original to punish Courtney for trying to feed his interns bad food. But now that Mal won the race, Chris has no reason to change the win condition, meaning that Mal gets invincibility. There isn't much to talk about heading into the vote, since both sides think they have the numbers, so there wouldn't be much reason for scrambling. It's possible that Courtney and Brick saw Dakota working with Commander Zoe today, and pulled Dakota aside to make sure she's still working on their side, but that's about it. As Brick and Courtney would be forced to vote for Commander Zoe, since Mal won immunity, plus Commander Zoe is Mal's right-hand woman, so it isn't that big of a loss if they get rid of her. Well, Mal and Commander Zoe would be voting for Brick, again leaving Dakota in the swing vote position as both sides think they have the numbers. And at the campfire ceremony, in a 3-2 vote, Commander Zoe is eliminated. Zoe is a bit shocked since she thought Dakota was on her side about being mistreated and thought they had common ground. Commander Zoe asks Dakota why she didn't follow her way. Dakota says that going primal isn't for her, and more importantly she does agree with Zoe that being used by bad people is a consequence of being too nice. That doesn't mean that she should be mean to the good people. Brick shouldn't be punished by her for what others did, and maybe people like herself and Zoe should be aware of who they're being nice to instead of treating everyone like they do or don't deserve their kindness. Commander Zoe has been abused enough at this point that I at least hope she wouldn't just flip back by this speech, and instead would remain cold, just wanted to get her elimination over with. However, Commander Zoe does give a farewell to Mal, telling him to win and kisses him on the cheek. Mike sees this in his mind and gets angry, being determined to destroy Mal. Brick, Dakota, and Courtney would all be together, making an alliance to get rid of Mal at the next vote. Mal would have a confessional, not being too upset about Commander Zoe being gone, but does recognize that he's at the bottom, and is angry about being foiled, saying he won't go down without a fight, punching the confessional camera. When it comes to the challenge, the first person who gets to choose a box to choose a treasure which they have to achieve is the winner of the last challenge, which in this case is Mal. Now, I can't really get a read on which box Mal would choose, since in the original he got the statue, but that was the last box remaining, which means he didn't really choose that, it was just the only option he had. So I ended up just spinning a random wheel to decide which treasure Mal would choose, and Mal ended up with the diamond on Fang. Now the order of who can choose the box after doesn't matter and is completely subjective, and since I already had to randomly spin for Mike, I figured that I might as well just do it for everyone else to achieve their arts anyway. So I just chose a person in my mind first, and then spinned a reel resulting in these choices. Brick got the art, Courtney got the Yeti, and Dakota got the statue. Now an important thing to mention here is that Brick's treasure, which is the art, was originally a challenge since Gwen had to find the existence of remaining art after Duncan blew up the mansion. But in this world, Duncan didn't blow up the mansion, so I had to figure out a way to alter the art treasure to make it an actual challenge. Now, the best I could think of was having Chef play guard of the art at the mansion that Brick has to get past to achieve the art. I do think it's kinda lame since it's just kind of an easier version of Mal's, but it was the best I could think of, and I guess it still kind of is a challenge in a sense that Brick has to get the art back to Chris undamaged.
So traveling with the art is kind of more of a challenge, whereas I don't think Mal would have too much trouble with a diamond breaking. Mal would follow Courtney, at first offering to help her find her Yeti. Since I don't feel like Mal would necessarily want to go and try and get the diamond from Fang if he can find a way around it, Courtney asks why he would do that, and he says that in exchange she promises to take him to the finale if he helps her. Courtney laughs, now asking why she would do that. Mal mentions that Brick and Dakota have known each other for a long time, and Courtney is an outsider to their group. They might like her, but they wanted to go to the finale together last season, and nothing has changed now. They choose each other over her. Mal even prods at Courtney, knowing how upset Courtney is that she never won, asking Courtney if she really wants to throw it all away now, when she can have a spot with Mal at the end. Courtney ponders his offer, but not wanting to convert to the bad side again, says no and says that she can do it herself while walking away. Mal is disappointed, but goes to get his treasure now since his plan with Courtney flopped. Originally when Mal got the statue, he didn't even bother looking for it, so we never actually know where it is, which makes it hard to really know if Dakota would be able to find it. I did some research to try and see if there was a confirmed location about where the statue was, and the best that I could find is in the mail room of the spa hotel, there was a Chris McLean statue in the background. Now when examining the two statues, the one in the spa hotel looks slightly different, but I feel they're close enough that if Dakota brought it back, it would be enough to save her from elimination. But the real question is if Dakota would find it, which is a much harder one to answer. I mean, first off, it's in the male side of the spa hotel, which she hasn't really had any opportunities to go see since she's not a dude. So honestly, I don't even really know what Dakota would do. Maybe she'd go help Brick. More likely than not, she'd just be looking for the statue, but wouldn't have any luck. Courtney would find the Yeti in the woods and be scared to approach it, and while she's hiding in the bushes planning her attack, Chris would loudly narrate over the speakerphones Courtney's progress, making the Yeti angry and causing it to chase Courtney. I don't think Brick would be having the best luck at the mansion with Chef, as a montage of Chef kicking him out various times play. Brick would then realize that he's not going to be able to brute force his way past Chef, so he's going to have to go for a more stealthy approach. Mal, I really don't have a clue on how he would do with Fang. Mal is pretty crafty, so I feel like he could find ways to trap Fang, but Fang's a big shark, so it's not exactly easy to get the diamond from him, even with clever traps. I think with enough time, Mal could eventually get the diamond, but I think he's also kind of getting annoyed that it's taking this long to get past Fang. Courtney would realize she isn't having any luck with the Yeti and decides to go to the ship for Mal's help. Mal's happy that she's taken his offer up, but Mal realizes that he also still needs to complete his task, otherwise he'll automatically get eliminated, and since he's also struggling with Kane, he figures that they can knock two birds with one stone if they can lead Fang to the Yeti, because then they will fight, making both of their tasks easier. Courtney asks how they would get Fang to follow them that far, and Mal smiles as we cut later to Courtney dressed crudely as Scott. Courtney doesn't like the look and asks why she's the one being used as bait, and Mal says that Fang already knows him so it wouldn't really work, also it was Mal's plan. Courtney fights for a bit, but once Mal makes it clear that she's wasting time, she goes along, not wanting to ruin their chances. Courtney goes to provoke Fang, and even though Fang can clearly see that Courtney isn't Scott, he would view it as disrespectful and intentionally trying to make him mad, which would make him mad, and Fang would chase Courtney as Courtney also runs, leading Fang to Courtney. Brick at this point now would have successfully gone past Chef, and there's a tense scene with Brick narrowly avoiding Chef's shot, and then running out of the mansion with the art piece as Chef follows after. Courtney is still running through the woods with Fang hot on her trail, and she can now see the Yeti. But Courtney trips while she's running, now leaving her on the ground as Fang slowly approaches her. Courtney quickly pushes herself backwards on the ground and yells for Mal's help, but Mal realizes that if she gets eaten, that's one less competitor to worry about. Also, while she's getting eaten by Fang, it would give him a chance to get the diamond, and being as ruthless as Mal is, he would have no issue with this. But I imagine at this point, Mike inside Mal's mind, watching all Mal has done, especially making the return of Command of Zoe and abusing Zoe, I feel it would have upset Mike even more than it did in the original, causing him to travel through his mind a lot quicker as he's devoting all his energy now to defeating Mal. And at this moment with potential murder at hands, Mike would defeat Mal, regaining control of his body, and just as Courtney gets cornered by Fang, Mike swings down from a vine, catching Courtney just before Fang bites her. Courtney is thankful and notices Mike's hair isn't swooped to the side, even pointing at it, speechless trying to ask Mike if he's there. Mike shakes his head saying he's back in control and Mal's never coming back. Even though Courtney isn't big on mushy stuff, she is thankful that Mal is gone, but quickly regains focus on the challenge, noticing that Fang is heading back towards the ship. Mike says he's on it while jumping down and whistling to get Fang's attention. Yeti and Fang see each other, but Mike realizes that they can't waste more time with their fight to make each other weaker and provokes both of them, causing both of them to chase Mike. Courtney has a confessional admiring Mike's confidence, but also labeling it as stupidity. Mike does the same thing as Zoe in the original, except also with Fang, leading them both on a vlog ride. Brick is still running with his art piece and Chef following behind as he narrowly gets to Chris first, with Fang and the Yeti coming in on a log ride shortly after. Chris applauds them for their clever thinking, and since they all brought back their items and Dakota isn't even here, Chris announces on the speakerphones that Dakota can stop looking since she's been eliminated. Dakota groans but accepts defeat graciously since she already won last season and is proud of herself for making it this far as a winner. And now comes the second part of this elimination, which is by Brick to decide who gets eliminated next since he got back for his prize first. And He obviously chooses Mike. Even though he's Mike now and not Mal, he still holds him accountable for what Mal did. And Mike fully understands this, not even wanting to get this far as Mal, and especially not to the finale, since if Mike did win like this, he would know he only won because of Mal, and that wouldn't sit right with Mike. Leaving our two finalists, Courtney and Brick.
For those of you that are new to my channel, when I get to the finale, I typically kind of drop the what if format and change it to basically a rewrite since, you know, the winner's elimination order, everything's already decided. But now I just kind of want to end the arcs I've created on a fulfilling note. So if you're here for a what if basis, this is the what if basis, elimination order, all that jazz. But if you care more about story, then stick around for the finale. Brick would be kicked out of the spa hotel, with Brick complaining as it happens. Brick explains in a confessional that even though Brick won the Zeke challenge and got to stay in the spa hotel as long as he was in the game, Chris kicked him out for the night, saying he doesn't want Brick to have an unfair advantage in the finale since that'd be kinda boring. Brick isn't too bothered by this since he wants to beat Courtney fairly and prove to everyone that he isn't afraid and he's worked hard to get here. Courtney watches from the steps of the loser's cabin as Brick gets thrown out, and walks up to him and gives him a hand to help him up. Brick takes it and gets up as Courtney congratulates him for getting this far, but also strengthens her grip on his hand, smashing it, and warning Brick that she's giving it her all tomorrow, before letting go of his hand and going to bed. Courtney has a confessional, giddy that she's finally at the finale, and even better it's in an all-star setting. Courtney says she feels a little bad for being aggressive with Brick, but Courtney isn't going to let the win fall out of her grasp when she's this close. The challenge would start with Brick and Courtney selecting weapons to shoot down their helpers with. What? Brick would choose the paintball gun since I imagine he's good with aiming something like that because of his cadet training. Also because I see Brick being a bit more compassionate and knowing that he's going to be shooting at balloons with people in them, doesn't want to shoot something dangerous. Courtney would choose the pasta launcher, being less considerate of the people and more strategic since the pasta launcher shoots the biggest shots. Courtney knows with the pasta launcher she can be less accurate and it will be okay. Again, because I'm doing essentially a rewrite at this point, I can choose whoever I want for their help. Why can't I say helpers? And I decided on Gwen and Duncan for Courtney, and for Brick, Cameron, and Zoe. Courtney gets excited seeing Gwen, running up to her and pulling her in for a hug, but she's wary of being around Duncan. She's not aggressive or mean to him now, since she does feel genuinely bad about not believing him, so right now she's just kind of avoiding him. Brick apologizes when he sees Cameron for causing his elimination, but Cameron doesn't have any hard feelings, telling Brick he understands he was between a rock and a hard place. Besides, Brick is ultimately the one who took Mal down, so he made up for it. Both Brick and Cameron are awkward around Zoe, since she has remained in Commando Zoe form from her elimination, and is glaring at both of them when they mention defeating Mal. Brick would cross the first moat like Zoe originally does, with Cameron letting Brick and Commander Zoe use his bubble as a raft, and once they get to the other side, it explodes, having Cameron land in Commander Zoe's arms. Duncan, having a delinquent background, would suggest to Courtney to pole vault over the moat, and Courtney is hesitant for a while since she doesn't know how to do that, but once she sees Brick get the lead, she gets angry and does it, landing on the other side, but almost falling backwards into the moat of toxic waste. While Courtney is trying to save herself from falling backwards, Duncan would yell from across the moat to tuck her hips in. Courtney listens to Duncan's advice and is able to recenter herself while gasping at the close call. Courtney starts to climb up the ladder, but looks back across at Duncan and Gwen, asking how they'll get across. And Gwen tells her not to worry and they'll figure something out, but Courtney should continue on without them. Courtney nods and continues climbing the ladder. Brick, Cameron, and Zoe would be at the lava layer, with Cameron suggesting that they use the ladder from the last level as a bridge like he originally does for Zoe. Brick agrees and they work together on that, but Commander Zoe sees Courtney just getting up, and since they are essentially rivals because they didn't get along during Commander Zoe's short stay, she would go over to mess Courtney up. She gets to Courtney and starts messing with her about her abandoning her helpers, saying that's very on-brand for Courtney. Courtney doesn't let it get to her since she doesn't have time and continues trying to plan out a way across the lava moat. Gwen and Duncan would be riding a log across the toxic waste moat like Heather and Alejandro do originally. Gwen would ask Duncan how smoothing things with Courtney went, and Duncan, remembering what it was like when he was in the game, says not well and he's sorry. Gwen isn't mad at him since it was mostly just important to her that Duncan tried to fix things, and Gwen does point out that Courtney doesn't seem to be mad at him today. But Duncan dismisses this train of thought, saying there's a lot of reasons Courtney could be hiding her anger today, and the biggest one is sitting next to him, implying that Courtney is playing nice because Gwen is here. Brick would walk across the ladder bridge as it unexpectedly sets on fire behind him. Brick breaks into a sprint, making it to the other side, and afterwards he turns behind asking how Cameron will make it across. And Cameron says he'll be fine and Brick needs to continue. Brick tries to do his whole no man left behind thing, but Cameron points out that he's probably safer if he doesn't continue, since the moats are really dangerous, and even plays the role of a sergeant, telling Brick to retrieve that sword and that's an order. Brick salutes Cameron while saying saying "Sir, yes sir," and continuing the challenge. Gwen and Duncan now catch up to Courtney, who's still getting harassed by Commando Zoe. Gwen, never having seen this version of Zoe, and once being friends with Zoe, asks Zoe what she's doing. Commander Zoe gets up in Gwen's face, telling her to mind her own business, and calls her a basket case. Gwen backs up, annoyed, asking Zoe why she's acting like this, saying Mal is gone and she doesn't have to be like this, and even mentions Mike, saying Mike wouldn't want this for her. Commander Zoe asks why she's supposed to care what Mike wants now. Mike abandoned her when she needed him, and it once again resulted in Zoe having to give up everything to make it work. Commander Zoe even praises Mal, saying that he was a fighter and a worker, and he deserves respect. Gwen is offended by this praise of Mal, and starts listing off all the bad things Mal did, but before she can say more than two, Commander Zoe pushes her off the ledge back to the toxic waste level. Commander Zoe says enough games while kicking the ladder over, saying she's going to stop Courtney's dreams right now. Duncan stands between Commander Zoe and Courtney, telling Courtney to hurry up, and he'll hold her off. Courtney finds a pogo stick and jumps on it to get to the other side, but before she launches herself to the other side, Commander Zoe lands a punch to Duncan's face, making him dazed as he stumbles near the edge of the lava, about to fall in. Courtney throws the pogo stick to the side and pulls Duncan back to safety right before he falls into the lava. Courtney checks on him, making sure he's okay, and now letting her rage take over as she kicks Commander Zoe off the edge. Duncan asks Courtney why she saved him, and Courtney says she wasn't going to let him die, at least not anymore. Courtney says she still doesn't like Duncan, and Duncan interjects saying right back at you. Courtney shushes him while continuing and saying that she does think he's changed, even though she hates that she wasn't good enough for Duncan to change, she's glad that Gwen is. Besides, Gwen is happy with him, and Courtney feels comfortable knowing that Duncan will protect her at all costs. And now she understands it from Duncan's perspective, saying that it isn't fair for Gwen to have to choose between them, so Courtney asks if they can be not despising each other, but not friends. And Duncan grins, saying that's all he ever wanted. Courtney realizes that when she let go of the pogo stick earlier to save Duncan, the pogo stick fell into the lava, and Courtney gets angry, thinking she has no way across, but suddenly her ladder from the other side falls to her side, making a bridge. She looks over to see how it happened, and sees Brick. Brick tells her that if he beats her, he wants to do it fairly, before telling her to hurry up, while Brick himself continues in the challenge. Courtney, given the second chance, quickly gets up and continues in the challenge. Brick gets into the water moat before Courtney, but as he's swimming, Fang emerges from the water, causing Brick to swim away in a hurry away from Fang. Courtney comes up to the moat shortly after to see Brick being chased by Fang. And Courtney, feeling slightly indebted to him for saving her when he didn't have to, grabs a long sturdy bamboo pole and slams it on Fang's nose, causing him to yelp while swimming away. Brick thanks Courtney for saving him, and Courtney says he helped her at the lava moat and she helped him here. They're even now, so don't expect any more handouts, while she continues to the ladder. Brick grins, liking the challenge, and continues to his ladder. The alternate winning endings here are based off just who gets to the sword first and pulls it out, kind of like it is with Mike and Zoe originally. In Brick's winning ending, Brick celebrates with Cameron, ecstatic that he won, as Chris hands him the briefcase. Brick even sheds a tear, thanking his mom, making some people slightly uncomfortable for him, but everyone is still happy that he won, since he was a good guy. Gwen puts an arm on Courtney's shoulder, asking if she's okay, and Courtney is content, saying that Brick is a good guy and he deserves it. Gwen is shocked by Courtney's maturity, as Courtney even walks up to Brick, congratulating him on winning. Also, for the people who keep shipping Brick and Courtney last video, you can have a tiny win here. If you want Courtney to kiss Brick on the cheek here while Courtney congratulates Brick, I'm completely okay with that. Just know that I'm not affiliated. Courtney has a confessional saying that she thought she'd be more mad, but she got her friend back and even made some real friends that like her, so she's happy and maybe there's more to life than just winning. In Courtney's winning ending, Courtney screams loudly of joy as she jumps up and down, while Chris gives her the briefcase. Brick is on one knee, tired from the challenge, and Courtney uses the sword to knight Brick. Courtney says a while ago she knighted him as a leader, and now she's knighting him as a hero, saying he didn't have to help her continue, but he did, and she's thankful for that, while offering her a hand out for a handshake. Brick is nervous, asking Courtney if she's going to crush his hand again if he accepts, and Courtney giggles while saying he'll have to find out, and Brick takes her hand and they have a true handshake signifying equal respect. The season ends the same way as it does originally, with Cameron asking Chef how he made the moats and the entire island sinking, since whatever, doesn't really matter. There you go. I don't know how to label what if Chris assigned the teams correctly, Avenger of the Island, All-Stars effects. I will say I'm not super happy if everything played out. There were a couple things that happened that I wasn't the most happy with. The main thing was Scott's elimination episode. Going into that episode, I really would have preferred that Dakota gone, since I feel like Dakota kind of did all she really needed to, and I would have preferred someone like Scott to get more screen time. But as I was writing for the merge half of this season, I was actually kind of more happy that Dakota stayed, since I feel like she got to do more. And obviously, I don't ever really want like a double winners thing. I think that would be bad. But if there was a winner that I think, I would have had to somewhat be okay with them winning twice, I think it would have been Dakota. Because Dakota's arc this entire season was kind of being underestimated all the time, just a sweet little girl who doesn't know what she's doing, even though she won a season. So I feel like if she did win twice, I wouldn't be too upset with that, because it would basically be 100% indicating that she is a threat to be taken seriously because she has done something that no one else in this game has done. She has won twice. Obviously, I'm glad that she didn't win, but I am saying that if that did somehow happen, I wouldn't have been too upset with it. Also, role writing, I was kind of upset that Zoe got taken out at the final 5 instead of like someone like Dakota, so that way Mal and Commander Zoe could have gone out in the double elimination, since I feel like that would have worked better for, you know, for Mal getting defeated, since now Mike defeating Mal kind of felt anticlimactic, since all he really did was like save Courtney and then got eliminated. I do think it's kind of a better thing that he saved someone like Courtney, you know, not a great person, and Mike got to kind of have a more heroic arc at the end. And even though I wasn't initially happy that Zoe got taken out at the final 5, I actually do think I like it a bit more because it kept the option for Zoe to stay as Commander Zoe. And I always thought Commander Zoe was a really interesting rendition of Zoe. Last season, I didn't like the way it was presented where she was just Commander Zoe for like an episode. You know, she had all this anger from her situation and she just forgets it all in one episode. Like, I didn't really feel it. And I do kind of like it more now that she stayed as Commander Zoe even at the end of the season. You could say it's kind of like a sad ending for Zoe. She didn't get to be who she wanted to be, but I do think like eventually she would have maybe grown out of it, or even if she didn't, I think it's like not a bad thing for who she was. Maybe she could eventually kind of learn a balance. But I think for story reason, it was more interesting to actually keep a sense of realness to what happened to her, because I feel like if she just reverted back to Zoe instantly, it would have been like not as meaningful that she even became Commander Zoe, you know? It's just like she's here and then she's gone again. Like I don't feel like that would have really mattered. But now there's like a real impact to what happened to Zoe. It's kind of permanent in a sense. So I don't know. I'm happy with the season. And yeah, thanks. Bye.